using Desmos in class, using Desmos classroom activities. Both synchronous if you're face-to-face, but also it can be used asynchronously if you're assigning something for students to be working on at home. So I thought so we'll just start by looking at the top of this file. There's 3 links there. The first link is to teacher.desmos.com. That's where you're going to find Desmos classroom activities. The second link there in the top, it says learndesmos.com/coronavirus. That's where you can find a lot of really valuable resources for further investigating how to use Desmos classroom activities and where to go for more information. And the last link there, Nova Scotia Desmos Collections, is a link that goes to a page that has collections of Desmos activities that are aligned to the Nova Scotia curriculum for grades 7 through 12. So we're going to start off with just what is Desmos. So I'm going to ask you in a little bit, just in the chat box, if you're comfortable saying what grades you teach and if you're comfortable with Desmos activities. But what Desmos is there's really 2 parts to it. There's the online free graphing calculator, but then there's also classroom activities, and the classroom activities are powered by the graphing calculator, but they add on a lot more capabilities besides just using the graphing calculator. So many people, when they hear Desmos, they only think of the graphing calculator part of it, but there are a lot of other aspects to Desmos using classroom activities. So our talk today is going to mainly focus on the classroom activities. There's a link there that says art. That link will take you to a page of artistic creations created just using the graphing calculator, using functions and points and polygons and things using the graphing calculator. If you have a few minutes, that's a really interesting place to go look and see the type of art that students are able to create just using the graphing calculator features that are available there. Just knowing we have limited time today, we're going to focus on classroom activities. So we're going to start off with an introductory activity that starts with a slide about Chex Mix. So I'm going to paste this link. I'm going to copy this link here and paste it into the chat box. And during the day, what we'd like you to do is have 2 tabs open. So one tab, we're going to have this shared screen, and the other tab, we're going to be running some Desmos activities together. So I'll be modeling how you might run a classroom activity either virtually or in person while we're going here. So what I'd like you to do is on that in that chat box, you'll see the link to the Chex Mix activity, and we're going to start with that this morning. If you've never used a Desmos activity before, the first screen it's going to come to is going to ask you to either sign in with Google, sign in with Desmos, or continue without signing in. A nice feature of Google is you don't need an account to sign in. Anyone can sign in right away. So I see several of you are already in the activity. So I would recommend, if you don't have an account as a teacher, I would definitely suggest creating an account. If you do have an account, students don't need an account to participate, so there's no issues with Privacy Act. But teachers, I would definitely recommend to create an account. And I personally like creating an account that's attached to your Google. That way you don't have to remember an additional login or password. So there's a few screens there. I'm just going to let you go through those screens together, and then at the end, I'm going to go point out some features that you would have seen in those screens. So if you have questions or unsure how to get into that Google Doc, please put a question in the chat box. Otherwise, I'll let you work through the first few slides of that Desmos activity. We're just about ready to, I think just about everyone is on to the draw something interesting screen. So what I'd like you to do at this point, you can stay in the Desmos activity, but just come back to the shared screen. And what I'm sharing now is the teacher dashboard that I see. as the person running the activity. And I'll show the summary screen that I see. So this would be the summary screen. And you notice up at the top left of the summary screen for the teacher, we have 3 different classroom tools here for running the class. I can choose to anonymize the classroom, which means I can turn on and off students' actual names. So right now I have it anonymized. So instead of seeing your actual names, all of your names have been replaced with a famous mathematician's name. So if I turn that off, I'll see the actual names. If I turn it back on, I'm back to the anonymized names. I also have this pacing feature enabled as well. You'll notice along the top, there are actually 10 screens in this activity, but I've restricted it just to the first 8 screens. So at any time, I can pull everyone to a specific screen. So if I wanted to stop limiting people to the first 8 screens, I'll just hit stop in that pacing. And then everyone's on screen 8 right now. If I wanted to bring everyone back to screen 3, I could have the pacing and just limit people to screen 3, and then it's going to pull everyone back to screen 3 that's in the activity still there. And you'll see what it looks like once all of the data has been collected. As well, so I could do that. I could add on additional screens to let people go. I like stopping on a screen like this that gives people something to do. So having a drawing page like this gives students that are really quick something to do, and you can see that people have been very creative about drawing different images with that isometric grid paper. It's a little more interesting than just having a blank palette for students to draw on something like that. And the last feature that I'll just bring your attention to is the pause feature. So at any time, I can press pause, and that will make everyone's screens go gray. And then that's a really useful way to get students' attention, especially if you're doing it synchronously in a classroom and you want to draw people's attention to something specific. So just so if you're interested, you can see that the majority of people that are here today have not used the Desmos activity in class. A few of you have. Everyone has a variety of comfort level with using Desmos, sort of all over the place. Most people here are junior high, but a couple of P to 6 and a couple of 10 to 12. And then we have some nice tools, some nice drawings here. I'm going to take a moment to wait for if there's any questions so far on what you've seen or what we've gone through together so far as a group. So I'll just wait to see if there's any questions in the chat box before we go on. All right, I don't see any questions, so we're going to continue on here. So I've changed our shared screen back to the Google Doc about using Desmos classroom activities. I'd like to say that in technology, using technology in classes, sometimes that technology can actually hinder a math class, and sometimes it can energize a math class. If you have a specific example you want to share, you feel free to put something in the chat box. But I know when I've talked to teachers in the past, a lot of teachers talk about the obstacles of technology being when it doesn't work right. When you've got an activity and then the Wi-Fi goes down, or the Chromebooks don't log in correctly, or something doesn't work the way it's supposed to work, then that can really be a stumbling block in the classroom. Other times, technology can really energize a math class when it allows students the flexibility to be creative, when it allows students to be able to differentiate the math that they're doing, when it allows students to explore things that are of great interest to them, then it can really energize a math class. And I think Desmos can do some of those things. I want to talk through some of the features of Desmos through the lens of Jeff Kral's book, Necessary Conditions. There's a link there to the book. If you haven't seen this book before, I'd highly recommend it. It's a mathematics book for secondary teachers. And there aren't a lot of secondary math books out there about about teaching mathematics, and I think this is a really well-written one with lots of great examples for classroom ideas for things to do in the classroom. I saw Louise is here, and she would probably be familiar with this. I know we worked in HRCE. We talked through some of these aspects of Jeff Kral's book with high school department heads in HRCE. So there's three main conditions that Jeff Kral says are necessary for a effective math classroom, and those three features are academic safety, quality tasks, and effective facilitation. And he stipulates that you really need all three of those to have a really well-running classroom, mathematics classroom. So the first part is academic safety, and that's really talking about making students feel comfortable and willing to participate in class and feeling like they are mathematicians in the classroom. Quality task, meaning that you have to have a good activity for students to be able to dig into, something that's going to be interesting to them, that's going to be at the right level of mathematics for them, at their just right level, and that has it's low barrier, high ceiling, that that it can appeal to a lot of different students at different levels. And then effective facilitation is is actually delivering that lesson well to the students in your classroom. So I want to go through those in specific in each of those three things. So academic safety, I think we've looked at one of the features of Desmos that helps with giving that feeling of comfort for students, and that's the anonymize feature for students. Being able to anonymize the classroom really helps students feel comfortable asking questions or typing things in, knowing that if the teacher's going to show a screen, it's not going to show their name to the whole class, it's going to be an anonymous feature. But at the same time, the teacher knows who everyone is. It's not truly anonymous, it's just anonymous to the rest of the class. Another feature is welcome screens or check-in screens for students. You notice at the very beginning of that Desmos activity that we did with the checks mix, there was a check-in screen to see how you were feeling today. That's a really nice way to start to learn a bit more about your students, especially when we were distance learning. To be able to have a venue for students to tell you how their day is going is sometimes a really important way to communicate with students, and in a easy way for students to communicate with teachers without feeling they have to send you a big long email or something. That you can type in how they're doing. There's this link will take you to a collection of Desmos activities, Desmos screens that are just made for check-in starter screens. So this activity here is just a whole bank of different types of check-in screens. You'll see that first one is the one we used here about how you're feeling today. But there's lots of different ones, just like what would you like me to know today, where are you today, to be able to drag a point and to say more. So there's a big variety of types of check-in screens that you might drop and put at the beginning of your activity. So when you're creating an activity, you don't have to create these things from scratch. If there's a collection of screens like this, you can just copy and paste a screen like this right into your own activity, and they're really easy to tweak exactly what the question is asking. One person that's done this really well, Joel Bazaire, has made a collection of Desmos activities that he calls story times, where it's just a really nice story where he brings students through a story about some sort of historical math item. I think there's one about the bridges of Königsberg, and lots of different ones like that. So if you're interested in seeing how someone has included check-in screens at the beginning of the Desmos activity, that would be a good place to start. We're not going to do it today just because we have limited time, but if you've ever done a polygraph, I saw on someone's response that they had tried a polygraph with their class. A polygraph is basically an activity that's a guess who activity. And a guess who activity, students are paired up in class. One student is asked to select, in this case, a quadrilateral shape, and the other student is asked to try and identify through yes or no questions. That's a great activity that gets every student asking and answering questions, participating in class, instead of, some students sometimes will sit in a classroom and not really participate in a class, where this really encourages students to participate and ask their own questions and be involved in the classroom. Before we move on to the next task about Marcellus the Giants, are there any questions before we move on? All right, we are going to try another task called Marcellus the Giant. And I'm going to use this task to talk about quality task and the features of quality tasks. But in order to do that, we're going to start with actually trying the task out. So I just dropped the link to this activity in the chat box, or you can click on the link on the Google Doc there. And we're going to take a few minutes to try that activity out. So I'm just going to be quiet for a few minutes, and I think I've restricted you just the first few screens of this activity. So we'll pause after everyone's in and has a chance to try the first few screens. Once you've gotten to the fourth screen, if you come back to the shared screen, I've shared the student summary screen, the dashboard for Desmos for this activity. So it looks like most of you are in and have gotten through question slide 4. This is a great activity that gets students thinking about scale. So this is a great for junior high when they're talking about scale, talking about what scale is and what scale isn't, and then asking students to talk about or think about what scale is and isn't. So instead of starting off by defining scale and telling students what scale is, to show them examples and non-examples of scale and ask them to describe it to you, and using that as the launch pad for a conversation. So I will show you, there's a feature here called snapshots. So when I'm in the classroom, I can look at all of the responses that students have done. And then on the top right, there's a little camera. So any responses that I want to share back to the class, I can find that and then click the camera, and that will make a snapshot. And then up at the top, I can say snapshots, and I can see the snapshots that I've taken and build them into a page that I can then present back to students. So I can say some students here have made notice about that the difference between similar and congruent, that they're the same, they're just different sizes, or the images need to be identical except for the size. So what those people are saying there in those responses is describing the difference between similar and congruent. So once students have said that in their own language, then we can go back and layer on the correct mathematical terminology for what they've already noticed. You might also notice, actually, we haven't done this part yet. We're going to add on one more screen here. I'm going to let you go to the next screen and put in a number here and see what scale does. So this gives students a chance to play around with scale. So before we move on to the next screens, I'm going to ask you to just try more than one scale. Try one out and then try something different. See what happens as you change the scale around. I'm going to let you continue on to the next few screens now to, this is a point where students can differentiate for themselves. Students put in whatever scale they want, but then they're going to ask to make calculations based on that scale. So students that are not so comfortable with mental mathematics might want to put in a scale of 2. Students that are a bit more comfortable might be comfortable having a scale of 1/2 or 1 5/10 or some other scale. But this is where students can use their own scale. So whatever scale students put in, that's what they'll be asked to make question or to answer questions about their scale that they've chosen. So I'm going to pause people here, and I'd like you to come back to the shared screen. And I just want to show you 2 images that I pulled off of people's responses so far, so you can see the sort of things we can do with pausing the class and using some of the things that are going on within Desmos to have a conversation during the class about what's going on. So you'll notice that there's 2 screens here. So the screen on the left and the screen on the right. So if you were looking at the screen on the left, what do you think the scale of Marcellus the giant is there? What is the scale that's been entered? And you just type in a number in the chat box, if you'd like.
A few people said 3, 5, 6.
So we can think it's kind of difficult to do on the screen, right? So you think about, if I stacked up these little guys, how many of them would stack up to make the large guy? And I think I could agree that maybe at least 3, maybe 4. I think more than 4 might be too many. So the second question is, okay, if the scale is 3 or 4, let's say, does that giant look like he's to scale to the original person? I think most of us would agree that on the picture on the left, he's the scale is maybe 3 or 4, and it does look like he is to scale. Like all the features of the giant are the same, right? The eyes are the same distance apart, the teeth are about the same size, the sword is about the same size and relative to the original. If we look at the second one, the picture on the right, what do you think the scale is there? So the scale of the image on the right compared to the original one on the left.
A lot of people are saying 1/2.
And I'd agree. It looks like about half. It looks like about half the size of the original. But does the person look to scale here? And I think it's pretty easy to see that if the person is 1/2, that sword is not half of the original sword. In fact, it's maybe 3 or 4 times the size of the original sword. So that sword is way too big. But we could look at the eyes and the teeth. Actually, it looks like the eyes are too close together to be scale here as well. So it looks like there's a lot of issues with scale on the other person. So if we scaled the person to 1/2, the person's features haven't been scaled to 1/2 properly yet. I'm going to take off pause and just give you a few more moments to play around with that if you'd like. And then we're going to move on. Actually, I'm going to take off the pacing. So if you want to move on through, there's several more screens here, and it gets into sort of grade 10 math here about looking at linear functions and how, if it's to scale, they're all on the same slope. They're all proportional on the same line. So I'll let you go as far with that as you want for the next minute or 2, and then we're going to continue our conversation.
While they do that, Eric, there was a question about anonymizing. From Mike. He asks, is gender taken into consideration when the program assigns a name?
So the answer to that is no. So Desmos doesn't know the gender of the student. So regardless of what name the student types in, it doesn't know what gender the student is. So it randomly assigns a famous mathematician to that person. All right, I'm going to pause us here and switch our shared screen back to the Google Doc again. And I'm just going to ask you in the chat box to ask some questions about, do you think this activity fosters curiosity and promotes engagement? If so, how do you think it does it? or if you have any responses to this activity about how it might have some of the features of a quality task.
Alicia Potvin says, absolutely. I like that students can explore different scales and choose their own numbers to work with. Lots of predicting and checking with the program responding to students' work. Jacqueline says, I think students would have fun making their characters look silly. They're required. This requires them to figure out how the graphs work. I might challenge them to make the funniest possible character.
Yeah, I like that response about challenging them to try and make something that's definitely not to scale. I think Alicia had something good there about that. It allows students to put in their own numbers. It doesn't force them down a specific path. You can really explore scale in a way that a textbook doesn't allow you to explore scale. You can type in whatever number you want there. You can type in negative numbers if you want. If you want to flip that guy upside down, that's sort of how Desmos interprets a negative scale. It's an upside down person. Students can explore fractional scales or positive scales or really huge scales. I've seen students put in like 1,000,000 as their scale to see how much of a little tiny pixel dot that the original person looks when you have the larger scale. So it really allows students to explore scale with whatever numbers they want. And I think that helps with making it a bit more engaging, right? It's not leading them down one specific avenue that they have to explore. And as well, as Suad mentioned, that it does make it accessible because everyone can plug in a number that they're comfortable working with. And it's kind of as Delaney mentioned, it is kind of a fun and funny little story there to go with it of the activity. And it really helps students make connections, right? Having this as an activity at the start when you're just starting to learn about scale in junior high can really have a lasting impact in class. You can go back and refer to Marcellus the Giant and the activity, and it's a common talking point with all the students in the class. And students can go back and try this out again anytime they want to, right? It's not done and closed. I like that there's a lot of feedback here. You plug in a scale and it instantly shows you what that scale looks like. So you can plug in a number for the scale of the sword, and if it doesn't look right, you've got a pretty good idea that you don't have the right answer yet. So you can continue to plug in different numbers and try new numbers until you get a scale that looks right, and you have some feedback there that a textbook activity, you don't really get that sort of instant feedback until you hand in the worksheet and get it marked and get it passed back, and it could be a couple of days later. So I really love the instantaneous feedback to students that you get in a Desmos activity like this. So we're going to move on to one more thing here, one more activity about effective facilitation, about some of the techniques you might use to facilitate a Desmos activity, whether it's in class or whether it's virtual like this. So we're going to try an activity called Turtle Time Trials. And I'm going to put the link here in the chat box if you'd like to click on that link. And it's gonna ask you just to use the very first slide. So I've restricted to just the first slide to start this activity. And it's gonna ask you to tell a story. So just one thing about effective facilitation. So on the teacher dashboard, that's the screen I'm sharing right now, I can see that everyone is on the screen. So everyone has gotten into the activity. You're all there. And there's a little blue dot in the summary box for all of you. And that means that you've actually entered in a story. So I know that all of you have entered in a story. And if I want to, I can go to the individual student screen, and I can look at each of the stories that you've all put in, so I can sort of read the stories that you've entered. You may not have finished the story, but there's something there for everyone. I really like this idea of starting with students telling a story. It's a great way to introduce a topic, because I mean, some students will tell a very mathematical story. Some students will tell a story where they'll name the two turtles and give you their backstory and why they're there to race that day, and be very creative in the types of stories they're telling. I think it's a really great way to engage students in the mathematical problem. It slows it down a little bit, so students have to take a minute to think about the context of the problem and what's going on before they try and layer on the mathematics on top of it. So they can really understand the situation before they start to think about the math that goes on top of it. I'm going to free you up to go on to the next two screens now. So feel free to go ahead. So now that you've had the story, you've told the story, you can go on and layer some mathematics on top of that story.
Erick, does Desmos allow speech to text?
I don't believe it allows it inside Desmos. I think if I'm using it, I would probably have Google Slides going to convert the text to speech. Is that the question you're asking?
Yeah, I was just thinking, if I'm a slow typer and I have an elaborate story that I want to tell, could I would probably do it in Docs and then copy it over? Is that what you would recommend?
Yeah, that's what I would recommend, to do that in either in Text Help or something like that, or with some other platform to dictate the story and then copy and paste it into Desmos.
Awesome.
So while you're working here, I just I'm demonstrating a feature here called feedback. So this is one of the newer features of Desmos, where the teacher can go in and give feedback to a student on the work they're doing. Now, I haven't given very effective feedback. I just said great work, which is nothing that's going to move the students along in their understanding. And I didn't really even take a moment to look at the work you did. I just wanted to show you the feature that was there, so that when you see that, there should be like a little red button on the top of your screen that shows you that the teacher has left you feedback. Then on my screen, when I see that I've left you feedback, it'll have a little gray triangle in the corner of the box for that summary screen on the dashboard. Once students have read that, the screen turns to a different color. That triangle turns to a different color. So I can see when students have read that feedback. Was everyone able to see that feedback that I left for them?
Seeing a lot of yeses, and I do have a question for you, Erick.
Okay.
Question here from Mike, asking, the activity is using feet per second. Does it default to imperial, or how difficult is it to switch to metric?
So this is a Desmos created activity. It would not be too hard to change it to metric, I don't think. You would just have to go into it. It would take some work, but it wouldn't be a lot of work if you've done some work, if you've done editing of activities before. Sometimes the more complicated activities that are created by Desmos have features that the rest of us don't have access to. I'm not sure if this is one of those. It looks like it's just a number line with labels in there that you could just change the labels from feet to meters. So I don't think this would be hard to change to metric, but I haven't tried that yet. I think I saw another question there about is feedback accessible?
Yes, is the feedback feature available only when students are working live?
So the feedback is available whether they're live or if they're not live. The only issue is that if students don't have an account, if they're just clicking in and saying, logging in without an account, every time they go in to see that, it sees them as a new person. So if you're doing this asynchronously, if students aren't using their own account, it's not going to be a very effective feature. It's only going to work when they're on there. If students have an account, then the next time they logged in, they would see that feedback. So if you gave this as a homework assignment, if the students logged in, then the teacher could go back and leave feedback on their own time, or not synchronously, not at the same time students are doing it. And then the next time students logged in, they would see that feedback. I think it works most effectively if you're doing it live while students are there, because I think students are a little bit hesitant to come back to an activity once they've already finished it. So I think it works best when the activity is live, and I think it's really beneficial when you're doing an activity virtually. So students might be all in this activity, and you could leave them a note and some feedback while they're working on it, instead of trying to send them an email or send them a message through some other platform. You could send them a message while they're working in this platform. Any other questions about the feedback? So that's a new feature, and so I'm going to go back to sharing the Google Doc. So in this feedback, actually, the different colored triangles. So when the triangle is green, it indicates feedback has been left, and the triangle changes to gray when the feedback has been read by the students. So you know, it's easy to tell if the students have seen that feedback or not. That feature is new, like 2 days ago. So they continue to add additional features. If you want to use the feedback with your students, you have to go into you have to go in and turn it on in the Desmos Labs. It's sort of a beta feature, so you have to go in and turn it on. I will just show you what that looks like. I'm going to share actually, I'm going to go to teacher.desmos.com. I'm going to share this screen here, which is just the teacher.desmos.com, where you would start and find activities. Under my name here, under my account, there's a thing that says Desmos Labs. That's where you can turn on or off these beta features that aren't fully implemented. You have to sort of opt into them. They're still sort of being worked on. So under Desmos Labs, there's marble slides, geometry, and written feedback. Those are all the beta features. Marble slides has been around for quite a while, actually. I'm surprised it's still in the labs feature. But the written feedback, they continue to make a lot of changes with that. So that's why it's in this Desmos Lab. So if you don't have it turned on, you won't actually see that. I'm going to go back to this tab, to the Turtle Time Trials, and I'll show you what it looks like here. If I go to a student, I want to leave feedback here. At the top of the screen, there's a little green button that says Lesson Feedback. So I can go through students and look at this specific screen, and I can leave feedback by clicking on this little feedback icon at the very top of the screen. And then I'm able to type in text. I can also put in math, just like I would type into the graphing calculator box. And so you can either scroll through a specific screen through all the students, or you can look at a specific student and scroll through all of that student's screens. So some different ways to leave feedback here. We are running up close to the end of our time here, so I think we're going to go back to our shared document here, just to finish up with a few additional ideas. So I know one thing a lot of people are looking for is, where do I go to find activities? So I have three suggestions here for where do you go to find activities. One, that you can always just Google search. Just Google search for Desmos activity, and then the mathematical concepts that you're trying to find, and you'll find lots of activities that way. Unfortunately, that's a hard way because you have no idea of the quality of the activity. You have no idea if it's well aligned to the provincial math outcomes or not. So it's a really time-consuming process to do that. So what I have here is a link to Nova Scotia Desmos collections. In Desmos, you can create a collection. So a collection is a group of Desmos activities that you can sort and do. So I'm going to show you the web page here that I have with a list of Desmos collections for each of the grade levels. Some are in French and English, and some are just in English. It just depends if there's enough activities there to make that worthwhile. I'll just show you what the Mathematics 8 Desmos collection looks like. I'll click on that link and then I'll share that tab. So this is a collection of activities for grade 8. I have it broken down by unit and the list of the outcomes for that unit, and then what activities are well suited for that outcome or that unit. Where I found activities that exist or where they've been created. There's a couple by Alicia that's in the session now. So a lot of so this I think is a good way, and all you have to do is when you see a collection like this up in the top right, you can say you can add this to your own collection. So if this wasn't my collection, you could add it to your own collection. So as long as you're logged in, you have an account. On the left side here, there's a tab that says collections, and these are all the collections you have. So you can add someone else's collection, and then as that person edits that collection, you'll see the updated collection. So if you were to add these collections into your Desmos account, then every time I added an activity to that collection, you would be able to see the updated collection and what the new activities are. So this is something that I update pretty regularly as I find new activities that are well aligned to the Nova Scotia outcomes and I think are well created activities, then I will share them here. So if you're looking for a place to go, that link, so that web page has a whole list of collections there. That's a good place to go if you're looking for a specific grade level resource of a listing of Desmos activities. Another thing you can do is to actually just go to teacher.desmos.com and you can look at all the featured activities and collections that are already there. There are some really good activities that are highlighted there. It's just a matter of knowing whether they're well aligned to the Nova Scotia outcomes or not. And actually, last night I was on Twitter and I saw this lesson 0.1 that was shared by Julie Anker, and I thought it was a really nice way. And what it is it's an activity for the first time students have used Desmos before. It will run students through what is a Desmos activity, how to log into it, ask them a few questions about if they've ever used Desmos before. It'll show them about how to do feedback. It'll show them a bunch of the different types of screens they might see in a Desmos activity and how to do those screens. It'll show them how to type in mathematics and show them. It just goes through a lot of the different features of Desmos. So if you're in a classroom and students have never done Desmos before, this might be a worthwhile investment of sort of 30 minutes of time to give all the students in your classroom a really nice overview of the types of things they'll see in Desmos activities and how to use those features in the classroom. So especially if I was going back to the classroom and I wanted to make sure all my students had some experience with Desmos, starting off with something like this when we're live in the classroom, and then if we're not live later on, then at least students have had some experience with using Desmos. And if you need to do some virtual teaching again, students would be well positioned to do virtual learning through Desmos. I'll also mention, just I'll pause for a second to see if there's any questions about that.
Yeah, there were a few comments, some accolades about the platform. I'll just skip over those. And then Shirley indicated on the current day's activities, you can post a link to previous activities to show the feedback if you wanted the students to check on the feedback.
Wow, that's a great idea. I love that.
Yeah, and then Alicia and Shirley had a quick convo about if you see a Desmos site that needs a bit tweaking, can you make adjustments? And then Shirley responded, yes, using those 3 dots, you can make a copy and then edit.
Mhm.
And then Alicia said it's a great idea to use this to introduce Desmos and its features very early on.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think we kind of have like less -1 minutes left, but I'm going to take one more minute to just talk about editing a Desmos activity. So if I have an activity here on the 3 dots here on the right, I can do copy and edit. So if I'm not happy with exactly the way this activity looks, I can hit copy and edit, and this will open up my own copy of it. And this is the dashboard here for editing an activity. You can see all the slides are listed along the top. I can completely delete a slide. I can go in and redo the words in the slide if I want Desmos to be capitalized. I can edit this however I want and then publish it, and then it's a changed version for me. I can add in new slides by hitting the plus, and these are all the different types of slides that I can put in. I can put in multiple choice questions, text input, notes, checkboxes, ordered lists, graphs, media, all those things I can add in. So if you're not happy with a lesson, an activity that you find, it's easy to open it up, tweak it and edit it, rearrange the slides, delete slides, add new slides, whatever you want to do. You can, if you find just one slide in activity you like, you can grab it, you can copy it, and then paste it into your activity. So it's really easy to sort of remix Desmos activities until you get it to be the way you want it. Sometimes you'll have an activity that's a really close alignment to the Nova Scotia outcomes. Maybe it goes too far or not far enough, so that you can tweak it to make it a better fit to the Nova Scotia outcomes. There's also computation layer, which is even more features. That gets into like a programming language that you can go in and actually make connections between slides. So like the checks mix activity where you put in your answer on one slide and it shows you the graph on the second slide. That's done using the computation layer where it's pulling the information from one slide into another slide. There's a link here about Desmos webinars and webinar recordings. There are a lot of, if you're looking for how to do something new, Desmos has a lot of online training about specific things you want to do, and it's a great place to look for more information. So I'm going to leave it there with, if you have any last questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. I'll stick around. If you want to send me an email with further questions or reach out for other things, please feel free to contact me and I'll be glad to respond or help you come up with an activity or tweak an activity that you're not quite happy with. So thanks everyone for coming.